he had been left for dead in the woods. No radio, no backup, just the warm, sticky feeling of his own blood on the cold. Autumn leaves and the silent, indifferent trees of red leaf closing in around him. Deputy Cole Maddox had uncovered something dangerous, and someone in his small, quiet town had made sure that he wouldn't walk out of these woods alive. But the forest, on this one fateful day, was not empty. 2 10-year-old girls, out for a simple afternoon walk with their loyal German shepherd, were about to stumble upon a scene that no child should ever have to see. They weren't heroes. Not yet. They were just sisters, with a single second hand. Phone, a notebook full of a child's innocent dreams, and a dog who had never, not once in his life, left their side. What they did next would restore your faith in the profound and very real power of courage, of family, and in the quiet, mysterious ways that God still answers our prayers through the most ordinary and most unexpected of lives. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell, because this is the kind of story that reminds us all of why doing what is right, no matter how hard and no matter how scared we are, still and will always matter. The wind whispered through the scarlet and amber leaves of red leaf forest, scattering the first fallen ones along the mossy trails like forgotten and very beautiful letters. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late October, the kind of day that smelled of damp earth and the distant, comforting scent of wood smoke. The kind of a morning that made the small and very quiet town of Alderglen, Vermont, feel like a hidden chapter from an old and very forgotten storybook. Willa and June Fairweather, 10-year-old identical twins, moved through the woods with a familiar, easy grace. Hush. Willa walked ahead, steady and observant, her thick, chestnut hair woven into a loose braid that brushed against the collar of her navy blue scarf. June trailed just a step behind, slightly shorter, and a little gentler in her demeanor, her own eyes a touch softer. Her hands always searching for a perfect red leaf to admire or a smooth gray stone to collect. Despite their striking similarities in face and in build, their personalities diverged like the branches of a river. Willa was the protector, and June was the dreamer. Both of them wore matching, forest green jackets, faded at the sleeves and warm, knitted mittens that had been stitched for them by their mother in better, much happier winters. At their heels padded Rusty, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a beautiful sable coat of black and tan, fur and wise amber eyes. He moved with the quiet, confident authority of a dog who had seen more of the world than just the neighborhood fences. He had been rescued from a rural shelter after being trained as a search and rescue pup, but he had failed his final certification due to a slight, almost imperceptible limp in his left hind leg, a small and very permanent injury from his own difficult past. And yet he carried himself with a profound and very real dignity and a deep and very serious sense of a duty. He was always alert, his ears twitching at the slightest and most insignificant rustle in the underbrush. He was more than just their pet. He was their silent and very watchful guardian, their furry shadow in the deep and often very dark woods, their warmth on the long, cold nights. The girls had wandered down the South Trail, a path that was rarely used this late. In the season, a thick, beautiful blanket of dead and very colorful leaves covered the path, and the only sounds were the soft, satisfying crunch of their own boots and the occasional sharp snap of twigs under the hooves of a distant and very shy deer. And then Rusty stopped. He stopped suddenly, his nose lifted high in the air, his ears sharp, pointed, and very alert. Willa, the protector, noticed it first. They followed him, without a single moment of a hesitation, their own hearts now quickening in their chests, as if they, too, had sensed the sudden and very profound shift in the air. 30 paces in, they saw him, slumped against the base of a large red maple tree, half concealed by the fallen autumn brush, lay a man in a sheriff's deputy's uniform, his body crumpled and still, had blood. A dark and very shocking crimson had pooled beneath him, soaking into the rich, dark earth like a spilled and very final ink into old and very fragile parchment. His face was a pale, almost translucent white. His lips were tinged a faint and very terrifying blue, and a gaping, ugly wound in his abdomen throbbed, a weak and very final pulse with each of his own very shallow breaths. Willa gasped. June froze. And Rusty, their brave and very loyal Rusty, whined, a low and very worried sound in his throat as he circled the fallen man, sniffing with a new and very real urgency, but without a single solitary trace of a panic. There was no mistaking it. This man was dying. Willa, her own fear now replaced by a new and very powerful sense of a very adult-like purpose, dropped to her knees beside him. "He's alive," she whispered, her own small fingers trembling as she hovered them just for a moment near the terrible and very real wound. "We need to stop the bleeding." June, her own initial shock, now giving way to a new, very different kind of a resolve, pulled out the old second-hand flip phone their mom always made them carry with them on their walks. The screen flickered, a little uncertainly, but then it lit up. Deputy Cole Maddox had joined the Alder Glen Sheriff's Department 3 years ago. At 32, he had the lean, compact build of a long-distance runner with sandy brown hair that was cropped close to his head and a strong, quiet jaw that had seen its fair share of grit. He was a quiet man, a man who had always found a deep and very real solace in the woods. He loved patrolling the lesser-known forgotten trails, investigating the minor local poaching complaints, walking alone with only his own quiet thoughts and the simple, solid weight of his badge. What no one else in the small and very close-knit town knew, save for his own trusted superior and one old and very discreet friend, was that Cole had been, for the past 6 months, secretly trailing a new and very dangerous group that was suspected of illegal logging and a high-stakes international firearms trade. He wasn't even supposed to be out there on this particular, beautiful and very fatal Saturday morning. But his instinct, a cop's instinct, had pulled him in. It had nearly, and very finally, cost him his life. Willa, her own face now a mask, of a fierce and very adult-like concentration, pressed her scarf more firmly against the wound. "Hold this," she instructed her sister, June, who immediately knelt down beside her and applied a steady, even pressure with both of her own small, mitten-clad hands, biting her lips so hard that she could taste the faint, coppery temps of her own blood just to keep herself from crying. 20 minutes was too long. It was an eternity. The blood, a dark and very insistent crimson, kept coming, soaking through the thick woolen fabric of the scarf. Willa, with a new and very desperate sense of an almost primal urgency, reached for a fallen, dead stick, and with a sharp, cracking sound, she snapped it clean in two. She used one of the pieces to twist the scarf tighter, a crude and very painful, but very necessary tourniquet. "Don't you die," she muttered to the unconscious and very pale man on the ground. "You are not allowed." Rusty, their brave and very loyal Rusty, lay down beside Cole's legs, his tail now still, his wise, amber eyes watching the two small girls as if he, too, knew that their own very fierce silence was now a part of the fragile and very beautiful spell that was holding this man to life, back in town in a small, second-story apartment that was filled with the lingering, ghost-like scent of a bread that was no longer being baked. Maris's Fairweather sat hunched over her kitchen table, 36 years old, with a frame that was both sturdy and lean from years of standing behind counters and kneading dough. Maris bore the profound and very quiet exhaustion of someone who had carried far too much for far too long. Her dark brown hair, the same beautiful chestnut brown as her daughter's, was pulled back into a messy, practical bun, the small, stray wisps falling around her temples. And her eyes, the same beautiful hazel eyes as her daughter's, were lined with the deep and very real fatigue of a single motherhood and a stack of a very final and very red-lettered, unpaid invoices. She was in the middle of crossing out yet another and very overdue utility payment, when the old landline phone on the wall rang, a shrill and very unwelcome sound in the quiet afternoon air. Her heart jolted. Her own voice caught in her throat. "Yes," she said. Is something wrong?"
They're safe.
The officer had said quickly. "But there has been an incident. Your daughters. They found Deputy Maddox. He was injured in the forest. And they have administered first aid. The paramedics are on their way to him now." Maris had slumped back in her chair then, tears of a profound and very overwhelming relief stinging her eyes. But the relief was at war with a new and very different kind of a terror. She was proud, yes. So incredibly proud of her brave and very capable little girls. But she also, in that one single and very heartbreaking moment, felt like she had failed them. She had no idea that her own 10-year-old children even knew how to stop a person from bleeding. She hadn't even had the time or the energy or the money to teach them the simple and very necessary things like that. She had barely and only just scraped together enough money for their second hand, and now very worn out. Winter Boots Maris Fairweather was a woman of a quiet and very powerful resilience. 36, she had a strong back and hands that were calloused. From years of baking, she wore her exhaustion like a second coat. Her dark, beautiful hair, tied in a messy knot at the nape of her neck, had begun to silver at the temples. Not with age, but with a deep and very real worry. She had once dreamed of opening her own beautiful bakery, a dream she had briefly, with a great and very real joy, touched before the pandemic had shuttered her small, hopeful storefront, and with it, her financial security. Now she clung to the scraps of a fragile stability, scraping together a series of side jobs, baking muffins to sell at the local farmer's market, and tutoring the neighborhood kids in math on the weekends. Willa and June were at the small wooden kitchen table, still in their pajamas, their own young cheeks pink from the warmth of the old rattling heating vent below. Rusty, their silent furry guardian, lay curled under the bench, his ears twitching in his sleep. A quiet, hesitant knock at the door pulled Maris from her thoughts. She wiped her hands on an old faded dish towel and opened the door to a tall woman in a charcoal gray coat. Willa and June exchanged a quick, shy glance, unsure of what to say. Monroe didn't push. Maris cleared her throat. "I'm just glad he's going to be okay," she said. "The girls, well, they only did what they thought was right." "That's more than many adults would have done," Monroe said. "I just came from the hospital. He's out of surgery. He's stable. He lost a lot of blood, but the doctors say that he has a fighting chance." She paused, her tone growing softer. He asked about the girls. Rusty stirred then, sat up, and let out a low, protective woof. Monroe smiled, a real, genuine smile. "And this must be Rusty," she said. "The hero behind the heroes." Monroe's own expression shifted then, something behind her eyes flickering, a memory perhaps. "Dogs always do," she said. She stayed for only a few more minutes, offering her contact card and a quiet, professional promise to check in again soon. As she left, Maris walked her to the door. She left without pressing any further. But her mind lingered on Maris, on the way she stood, so straight-backed, so proud, but so clearly and so completely weighed down. Valerie Monroe knew that posture well. Her own mother had worn it, raising her and her two brothers after their own father had died in a warehouse fire when she was just 9 years old. But it had also made the road so much harder. Later that day, a local news van pulled up in front of the apartment building. The anchorwoman, a sprightly blonde in a red peacoat named Holly Marks, introduced herself with polished professionalism. "We'd love to feature your daughters on the evening segment," she told Maris. "I think the town could use a little good." News? Maris wasn't sure, but Willa's eager nod and June's hopeful smile softened her resistance. "Fine," she agreed, "but keep it respectful. They're still kids." Holly kept her word. The segment aired at 6 p.m., a montage of footage from the rescue scene mixed with brief interviews. Willa explained how Rusty alerted them. June, blushing, showed the scarf she used to stop the bleeding. "Just wanted to help," she said shyly. No one should have to be alone like that. The clip was shared hundreds of times online. Comments poured in. Such brave girls. The kind of story we need right now. Where do we donate? Maris turned off the notifications. She didn't want handouts, and she didn't want pity. What she wanted was a job that paid enough, and a home she didn't fear losing every month. That night, Monroe sat in her car in the precinct parking lot, staring at the case folder open on her lap. Photos of illegal logging equipment, a list of known felons suspected to be in the area, and Cole Maddox's preliminary report. All pointing to something bigger than a routine patrol gone wrong. Monroe had always been meticulous. At 42, she'd made detective by being calm, analytical, and deeply focused. But something about this case, about Cole's instincts, gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone in town, someone respected, might be involved. Back in the apartment, Maris tucked the girls into bed. They were buzzing from the excitement, but fatigue eventually pulled them under. Rusty climbed onto the foot of their shared bed, placing his chin between his paws. Maris returned to the kitchen, sat down, and opened her notebook again. She stared at the column labeled outstanding rent, gas bill, credit card minimum, school lunch fees. She chewed the inside of her cheek, then flipped the page to a list of bakery recipes. Maple scones, cinnamon apple rolls, oat-crusted bread, the things she once made with joy. The oven hadn't worked right in months. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. She opened the door to find a small envelope on the doormat. Inside was a note in tidy handwriting from someone who knows what it's like to raise kids alone. No strings, just gratitude. VM tucked behind the note was a gift card. To the local grocery store. Maris stood in the doorway for a long time, the cool air brushing against her bare arms. She didn't cry, but something inside her loosened just a bit, like a knot pulled gently apart. The hallway of Alder Glen Elementary smelled faintly of pencil shavings, floor wax, and applesauce, the comforting and forgettable sense of a normal childhood. But today, it was different. In the multi-purpose room, the entire student body had gathered. The gymnasium hastily transformed with rows of folding chairs and crepe paper. At the front of the room stood Principal Naomi Hayes, a woman in her mid-50s with a crown of short silver curls and a voice that could, with a single quiet word, hush a roomful of sugar-high fourth graders. She was tall, thin, and always wore a small enamel brooch shaped like an animal, a different one for every day of the week. Today's was a small bronze fox. Naomi had been the principal of this school for nearly 20 years, and she was respected not just for her strict academic standards, but for a deep and very real fairness she carried like a suit of armor. She tapped the microphone. "Students," she began, her voice a warm and very proud sound. "Today, we are here to honor courage. Not the kind of courage that shouts or that punches, but the kind of courage that acts quietly when no one is watching." Willa and June shuffled up to the stage, their matching forest green sweaters recently laundered, and Rusty, who had been given a special and very official permission to attend, sat obediently at their feet, a handmade paper medal hanging, a little crookedly from his collar. The applause was thunderous. After the assembly, Naomi crouched down to Rusty's level, running her fingers gently over his soft fur. "You are a good boy," she murmured. "Better than most of the adults I know." Meanwhile, across town, in a sterile, white hospital room that smells of antiseptic and filtered sunlight, Deputy Cole Maddox is staring up at the ceiling. His physical wounds are healing, but something else, something deeper, is festering just beneath the surface. The doctors had told him he was lucky, but lucky did not sit right with him. He felt hollow, as if he were missing a critical piece of a puzzle he didn't even know he was solving. Detective Monroe entered his room quietly, carrying a thick, manila envelope. She pulled a chair up beside his bed. "You look better," she said, her tone a flat, professional observation. Cole turned his head slowly, his face now a little less pale, but with new dark circles under his eyes. "Looks," he said, "can be deceiving." Monroe studied him. "Want to talk about it?" He hesitated. "Maybe," he said, "but not about me. About My dad, Cole's father, George Maddox, had been a police officer too. He had been missing officially for over 2 decades, the report labeling it a voluntary disappearance. Cole had never, not for a single moment, believed it. "I was 8, he said, his voice a low and very painful sound. He went out to check on a strange noise he had heard down by the old abandoned mill, and he never came back. My mom, she packed us up and we left town 3 months later, only just came back here last year. And you think," she said, "that your shooting is somehow connected to his disappearance?" He nodded. "The way they moved," he said, "the way they knew exactly where I would be. Oh, God. It wasn't random. It felt like they were waiting for me." Monroe opened the envelope then, pulling out a series of glossy crime scene photographs, tire tracks, fragments of a 2-way radio, and a rusted old pistol they had found near the forest clearing. She laid them out on the bed. "Do you recognize any of this?" she asked. He pointed to the radio casing. "That's police issue," he said. "Late 90s. My dad. He carried one just like that." Monroe frowned. "You think someone has just been hiding it out there in the woods for 20 years? "I think," he replied, his own eyes now as hard and as cold as steel, "that someone has been watching and waiting." Back in the Fairweather apartment, Maris sat on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking to the market manager, trying to rent her old stall back. On the dresser sat a half-filled jar labeled Oven Fund. Willa had started it, slipping coins inside every week. Maris hadn't had the heart to stop her. That afternoon, Willa, June, and Rusty wandered back toward the forest. "There's a part of the trail Rusty barked at last week," Willa said. "Never does that unless something's weird." Rusty led them to a clearing near a disused logging path. Suddenly, he began barking, short, sharp, and insistent. The girls froze. Willa scribbled in her notebook. Location, south of Miller's Hollow. Rusty, reactive. Possible scent detection. They didn't go closer, but they stayed long enough to snap a picture with June's hand-me-down flip phone. When they got home, Willa tucked the note inside her shoebox of important things. A treasure trove of leaf rubbings, weird rocks, and now an entry into something bigger than playground games. Later that evening, Detective Monroe walked through the precinct parking lot and passed by Officer Daniel Carnes, a recently transferred patrolman from Montpelier. She hadn't baked anything. She'd picked them up from a small table outside the Fairweather apartment where Willa had left a sign, $1 help us fix our oven. By dusk, the wind had started to howl. The very air over Alder Glen had shifted, growing thicker, colder, and full of a tense and very real expectation. The people of the small, quiet town, who were used to the short, violent tempests of the mountains, began to bolt their windows and pull their dogs indoors. But this was different. A real storm was coming. Maris Fairweather stood by the living room window of their small, second-story apartment, her own eyes trained on the trees in the distance as they bent like dancers in a desperate and very final prayer. She held her phone in one hand, her simple cotton apron still dusted with a fine, white layer of flour from the morning's baking. The apartment smelled of clove and cinnamon, a warm, comforting scent that was at war with the cold, hard knot of a new and very real panic that was beginning to creep into her heart. The twins weren't home. They said they were just going to the edge of the forest, she murmured to herself, her own voice a low and very worried sound. She turned and looked at Rusty's food bowl. It was full, and it was untouched. Deep in the woods, Willa and June clung together beneath the gnarled, ancient roots of an upturned tree, their own warm breath clouding in the cold, damp air. Rusty crouched beside them, his ears flat against his head, his powerful flanks heaving. The storm had come much faster than they had thought it would, the rain now falling in hard sideways sheets, the wind shrieking through the high canopy of the trees. And worst of all, there were voices. The girls had wandered deeper into Redleaf Forest that afternoon, pulled by Willa's insatiable and now very dangerous curiosity. They were hoping to trace more of the strange new trail that Rusty had reacted to. But then they had heard them. Men, speaking in low, guttural tones, their voices sharp and very unfamiliar. and they had seen the flicker of lights, not the warm, gentle glow of a camper's flashlight, but the cold, hard, and a professional beam of a set of high-powered headlamps, Rusty had growled, a deep and very urgent sound in his throat. And before they could run, before they could even think, they had heard one of the men say, his own voice a low and very deadly sound, "Those girls, they saw something. They had fled." And Rusty, their brave and very loyal, Rusty had led them to this hiding spot, an old hollowed-out space where the roots of the ancient tree formed a partial and very protective roof. The earth around them was damp and smelled of a deep and very old decay. But it was safe. For now, in the sheriff's office, Detective Monroe stood by the storm tracking map, a sick cold not twisting in her own stomach. The call had come in from Maris just minutes earlier. Missing girls. Possible danger. Their last known location, the edge of the forest, near the Miller's Hollow path. Cole entered the room then, limping slightly, but with a new and very different kind of a fire in his eyes. "I'm going," he said, his voice a quiet and very final command. Monroe didn't argue. She just handed him a radio. "We go together." She said they drove the department's heavy 4x4 into the squall, the windshield wipers beating against the glass like a pair of frantic, terrified hearts. The roads were already beginning to flood. Tree limbs, heavy with the weight of the rain, cracked and fell around them. But they pushed through. Every single, solitary minute mattered. In the woods, Willa was shivering, the cold, damp air now. Having crept deep into her bones, her teeth chattering against each other, she looked at her sister June, who was curled up next to her, her own small cheeks now red and wet with a new and very real fear. Rusty stood up again and growled, his entire body now tense. And then a sound, sharp cracking sound. A branch breaking, closer than before. Rusty's hackles rose. He took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, into the rain, positioning himself a silent, furry guardian. Between the sound of the approaching danger and the 2 small girls he had sworn his own, very dog-like life to protect. From the trees, 2 dark, shadowy figures emerged. Men, in heavy, dark coats, their own eyes cold and hard. Scanning the underbrush, the twins sat frozen, a new and very different, kind of a terror now gripping their hearts. They didn't dare to move. Cole and Monroe arrived minutes later, the bright, powerful headlights of their vehicle flickering through the trees. Cole jumped from the vehicle before it had even come to a complete stop, his own flashlight and his weapon now drawn. And then they heard it, a whimper, a low and very painful sound. Rusty stumbled from the tree line, a dark, wet patch of blood on his flank, his own injured leg now limping heavily. His eyes, his beautiful, wise amber eyes, found the girls, and his tail thumped once, a single weak, a very brave gesture, before he collapsed onto the wet, cold ground. Cole lifted the dog gently, his own heart now breaking as he cradled the brave and very broken body against his chest. "He's hurt bad," he said, "at the animal hospital." They were met by Dr. Martha Lowe, a petite woman in her early 40s, with a calm, direct demeanor. "He's lost a lot of blood," she said after examining Rusty, "but he's strong. If he makes it through tonight, he'll be okay." The girls didn't leave his side. Back home, dried and wrapped in blankets, Willa finally spoke. Cole sat nearby, overhearing every word. His eyes shimmered, and for the first time in years, tears slipped down his cheeks. Not for pain, but for the family he never got to keep, and for the one he was watching mend in front of him. A month passed, and with it the sharpness of late autumn softened. The newly painted sign above the market square read "Crumbs and Crusts, Maris Fairweather." Stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, a fresh apron tied around her waist. A crowd bustled about the reopening. A chalkboard on the side read, "Ask about our hero muffins," named after 2 brave girls and 1 very good dog. Behind the booth, Willa and June handed out napkins and change. Rusty lay beneath the table, a soft bandage still around his flank. his tail wagging lazily each time someone offered him a scratch. Across town at Alder Glen's Municipal Center, the community gymnasium had been transformed. A large banner read, Junior Lifesaver Program launch in honor of Willa and June Fairweather. Deputy Cole Maddox had made a full recovery, cleared his throat, and spoke into the microphone. Sometimes heroes don't carry badges or wear capes, he began. Sometimes they're 10 years old with scraped knees and more courage than most of us put together. The crowd laughed gently. This town has not only one more life, but a new program where kids will learn first aid, emergency response, and the value of staying calm in chaos. Applause rang out. At the end of the ceremony, Monroe stepped onto the stage with a velvet box in hand. And finally, we would like to recognize a member of this town who, though he walks on 4 legs, has the heart of a lion. Rusty, freshly groomed, walked toward the platform. Monroe knelt and clipped a small round medal onto his collar. K-9 Civilian Honor Award. The crowd stood. That evening, the Fairweathers returned home as a family of 5. Cole came with them, his arms full of leftover muffins, and his heart full of something he hadn't named yet. He had officially transferred to the town's community outreach unit. But more than that, he had started having Sunday dinner with the Fairweathers. And as the sun dipped low, painting the kitchen windows in honey tones, Monroe stopped by. She handed Cole a small cassette tape. It was found in the old department archive, misfiled, she said. It's your dad. They played it that night on an old cassette player. George Maddox's voice came through, rough, low, thoughtful. If you're hearing this, I guess I didn't make it out. But if one day you find yourself facing a choice between doing what's safe and doing what's right, please, son, choose right, even if it costs you. Guys, this badge means nothing if you're too afraid to use it when it matters. No one spoke for a long time after it ended. Cole finally set the tape down. He wasn't perfect, but he knew who he wanted to be. Willa sat on the front steps later that night, her knees hugged to her chest. June sat beside her, chin tilted up at the stars. Rusty lay between them, still recovering, his breath steady and warm. Sometimes miracles don't come as lightning bolts or grand rescues. Sometimes they arrive in the shape of 2 small hands, a wounded dog, and the quiet decision to do what's right, no matter how hard. This story reminds us that courage doesn't require age, and love doesn't need riches to be powerful. It reminds us that in our darkest storms, God often works through the least expected. Through children, through strangers, through those who simply choose compassion. Maybe you too have someone to protect. Maybe your act of kindness today is the miracle someone else has been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to believe in goodness again. Comment below. Love to hear your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to join us in sharing more stories that uplift, heal, and inspire. May God bless you and those you love. Stay safe, stay kind, and never stop choosing what's right.